Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Gitte Marie. There are many great things about living in Denmark and in the northern part of Europe, but the lack of light, especially when you want to record videos. So this is probably the light setting we'll be tweaking and working on for the next few months. Anyway, I wanted to sit down and chat with you guys today because I like to not only talk about greenwashing and what the bigger companies are doing and what you can do as a consumer, I also like to comment on current events and movements and things that happen within environmentalism. So one of the things that I know I haven't commented on at all, and I might be a little bit late to the party to actually do this, but I wanted to talk about the trap water movement. This is something that originated on TikTok, and I have seen a lot of people talk about this, and I think it's very interesting, but I also have some notes. I'm gonna give you guys my 2 cents on this because I have thoughts. Anyway, to me it seems like there are really 2 topics that we need to discuss here. There is both plastic and water usage. So why not talk about both? But before we do that, this video is sponsored. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is one of my permanent partners because whether it comes to learning something completely new and from scratch or tweaking skills you already have, this is the place to be. Skillshare has thousands of different courses, so you can basically learn anything from leading people and figures in the industry. And one of the courses I've been especially inspired by is this course about scrapbooking. I think it's really interesting how you can use materials that would otherwise have been discarded or perceived as waste and use them to make something beautiful and fun and engaging. From photography and marketing skills to leadership courses and graphic design, Skillshare has something for everyone. The course that I was recently inspired by is called Sustainable Sketchbook, Create with Recycled Paper and Learn How to Draw. It gets your creativity going and it feels so accomplishing to do something like this, so I definitely recommend you check it out. And the first 500 people that use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare, so what are you literally waiting for? I mean, like, watch this video and then you go click it. Okay. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, let's talk about trap water. Plastic pollution has massively increased in use over the last 70 years. In the 1950s, we produced around 2 million tons of plastic. Now we're producing 450 million tons. As someone who's tried to be plastic-free for almost a decade, I can testify that it's very hard to avoid this material. Because it's basically in everything. And the thing is, plastic as a material isn't necessarily bad. I don't think it makes sense to demonize this material, but what we should be criticizing is how we use it, because it is deeply mismanaged. Because plastic is very rarely recycled, and it also very rarely is integrated into a closed-loop system where it can be reused over and over again. In the vast majority of cases, plastic ends up in landfill or in the environment. It's estimated that only 9% of all the plastic ever made has been recycled, and that only 12% has been incinerated. The rest is either in use, or it's in landfills, or it's in the environment. And in the environment, plastic has a tendency of wreaking havoc, because plastic doesn't really break down, it just becomes smaller bits of plastic. When plastic enters the environment, it will be exposed to the elements, and especially sun rays will help break down the plastic into smaller bits of plastic, and from that they will disintegrate into microplastic, but they will never truly be gone. This is not a field that has been massively studied, so we actually don't really know the long-term consequences of exposure to microplastic. I have a specific video just about this, so if you're more curious, I recommend you watching that as well. Plastic doesn't only affect the environment, it is directly linked to climate change. And not only because plastic is directly affiliated with the fossil fuel industry, which is the leading cause of climate change today. Plastic as a subcategory or a sub-industry from the fossil fuel industry has annual emissions equivalent of 20% of the EU emissions from chemical industries. It's a lot. And if we don't reduce and limit the amount of plastic that enters the environment, we will have more plastic in the environment and in the oceans than fish by 2050. And the type of plastic we're specifically going to talk about in this video is water bottles. Because beverage companies, bottled water companies, do not actually sell beverages, they sell plastic bottles. This report analyzed data from 109 countries and found that the plastic bottle industry increased by 73% between 2010 and 2020, making it one of the fastest growing industries in the world. In 2021, the global bottled water sales reached 350 billion liters and were valued at an estimated $270 billion, a figure that's expected to double by 2030. And we should be doing the exact opposite if we want to reach our climate goals. And there are approximately 5 companies to blame for this. We are talking about Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Nestle, Danone and Primo. And coincidentally, some of these companies are also some of the world's biggest plastic polluters. Go figure. The bottled water industry generated roughly 600 billion plastic bottles and containers in 2021, according to this report. This resulted in around 25 million tons of plastic waste, 80% of which is not recycled and ends up in landfill. Just plastic bottles. This waste pile is so incomprehensibly massive. You could line them all up in New York and that line could reach all the way to Bangkok, and that's just 1 year of production. And that's plastic. Now let's talk about water. Earth is about 71% water, but only 2.5% of it is fresh water. And moreover, humans only have access to 1% of the world's fresh water, which ultimately means that even though we're surrounded by water, it's literally everywhere, we still have access to a very, very, very small fraction of that water. Water that we can use is a very finite and very unpredictable resource. And when I say that our access to water is unpredictable, what I mean by that is that with increasingly extreme weather conditions, we are seeing more extreme weather and we're seeing it more frequently. Because with climate change or with our climate collapse, what we're seeing is more unpredictable weather systems across the board. That also means that not everyone will have the same access to water, not that they've ever had that, but it's becoming increasingly asymmetrical where our water ends up. And if we don't change this as a global population, we're pretty much screwed. Now, this realization that water is a finite resource, that even though it's everywhere, it's still very limited how much of this water we can use, this realization that water is actually not something that will just keep running in our taps forever, reasonably enough, inspires a lot of fear or anxiety in many consumers, and I am definitely also one of them. A lot of people are feeling like we need to do something about this and we need to optimize the way that we use water more efficiently, and I absolutely agree. And this is where the trapped water movement comes in. The trapped water movement originated on TikTok, and I think this creator was the original poster talking about the trapped water, but eventually it spread to the rest of the internet. I think she started posting in 2022 or 2023. This movement is in broad strokes a call to action to release trapped water from plastic water bottles. Because the vast majority of plastic, and as such plastic water bottles, aren't recycled. They either end up in landfill, in nature, etc. And if there is water inside these water bottles when they end up in landfill or end up in nature, that water is just gonna stay there. It's not gonna be added back into the water cycle. And as we just talked about, because water resources are so limited, because we have such a limited access to water, we need all the water back in our water cycle, especially now when weather is so unpredictable and we're dealing with both floodings and droughts, etc. It's important that we add this water back into the water cycle so we can use it optimally. So this is a call to action to empty water bottles whenever you see them in nature. Not only pick up the water bottles and throw them into the correct recycling bin, but also to empty any water bottle you see, so we don't end up having thousands and thousands of gallons of water just trapped in water bottles in landfill. This is the movement. Now, as I said, I have some thoughts, and with that also some criticisms. Now, I'm not saying that this is a bad idea. I actually think it's an awesome idea, because I think any kind of eco-activism, any kind of green sustainable action is good. Any kind of way into climate movements and climate awareness is good and valid. So for many people, climate awareness doesn't just come to you out of thin air. You usually have some kind of way in, an angle, a stepping stone. For me, it was the zero waste movement, and as such also plastic awareness. And to many people, it might be thinking about landfills, thinking about plastic because of the trapped water movement. As such, I think it's just as valid of a way into the climate movement as any other way. However, I would like to add some additional perspective here, because what happens with these movements very, very often is that they zoom in and hyper-focus on issues without placing them into the wider context or without adding further perspectives. And as such, you can end up misrepresenting the issue to consumers and your peers altogether. And I know all about that because I found the zero waste movement back in 2016, where the trash jar was all the rage. This was a time in sustainability discourse where we just started talking about plastic straws. So let's just revisit that time for a second, because there are many overlapping issues here. So plastic straw awareness really gained momentum after a video went viral of a turtle getting a plastic straw removed from its nose. It's a very uncomfortable video to watch, and for a really good reason. A lot of people started to have reactions to it and wanted to eliminate these products altogether so this wouldn't happen again. There were also problems with the anti-straw movements, because what happened was that we started talking about plastic straws as the biggest threat to humanity ever known. Months after this video went viral, we saw restaurants and chain franchises, we saw whole cities and counties and countries, regions talking about phasing out and banning plastic straws. Then they introduced those like really awful paper straws instead that just absolutely sucks ass. I could be an environmentalist and still criticize the alternative. But we sort of all realized that we have to take action to eliminate this massive polluter, the plastic straw. Basically what happened here is that we took the whole issue of overconsumption of single-use plastic and we channeled it all into the plastic straw issue. But as you can probably imagine, single-use plastic overconsumption is a lot bigger and is a lot wider an issue than simply just talking about plastic straws. Now don't get me wrong, if you don't need a straw, don't get a straw. You can also use a reusable straw, but there's also the good old option of not using a straw. What happened with these movements and with these bans of straws is that we completely forgot about the people that actually depend on them, because the plastic straw is a helpful tool for people with certain disabilities, and they were completely forgotten in this whole debate and discourse about plastic straws, also forgotten by the zero waste movement. But what wasn't a part of this discussion at all was the fact that plastic straws account for a very small fraction of plastic pollution overall. Less than 1% of all plastic in the oceans today is accounted for by plastic straws. It's also less than 0.5%. It's a very small part of the problem, but it has taken up a disproportionate large part of the space of the discussion about plastic in the ocean. If we magically removed all plastic straws from existence today, we would still have the exact same amount of plastic pollution in the ocean, minus 0.002%. I think it's very important to understand that that is not the cause of the problem, because the majority of plastic pollution today can be traced back to fishing gear left by the fishing industry, aka ghost gear. In volume, fishing nets that are left behind account for a massive part of plastic pollution today. Furthermore, 1 truckload's worth of plastic is dumped in the ocean every single second, which over a year adds up to about 8 million tons of waste. Because the fossil fuel industry is selling the world's corporations cheap, subsidized plastic packaging without supporting or investing in any infrastructure to probably recycle or reuse it. Basically, what could remedy a lot of these issues would be if the fishing industry didn't leave behind their fishing gear, so political action and legislation on the fishing industry, and if we made the polluter or the manufacturer of waste responsible for the management of it. The industry responsible for creating these materials in the first place do not hold the primary responsibility for discarding or managing it. And that's why it just ends up in landfill everywhere in the world, because that is the cheapest way to manage it. And plastic pollution also disproportionately and asymmetrically affected different parts of the world. So the parts of the world with rich economies and infrastructures to actually manage this waste simply outsources a lot of the work to economies that are weaker and that do not have the infrastructure to actually manage this waste. That is a major political issue that cannot be solved simply by phasing out plastic straws. So how does this have anything to do with trap water? Well, there are some overlapping issues of focus, because it might not be as big of an issue as it's sometimes made out to be online. Because while it can take hundreds of years for a plastic bottle to break down. I'm never gonna talk about plastic breaking down without massive quotation marks. But that doesn't mean that the water is trapped for hundreds of years. What will happen to plastic bottles in nature is that over time they will get brittle, just by existing, but especially so when exposed to the weather, rain, wind, and especially UV rays from the sun. Then they start to come apart, and as such, you don't necessarily need the whole bottle to break down before the water is released from it. I could also imagine that the screw and cap mechanism will break down and become really fragile rather easily, so the water could also escape from there, because only a small hole in the plastic bottle will release the water. So it might be a tiny bit dramatic to say that unless we release the water from the bottle, it's doomed to be trapped there for hundreds of years. I don't think that is the case. But obviously there's tons of good sense in simply emptying your water bottle before you recycle it. If you plan on dropping your bottles in nature, please empty them before dropping your bottles. But also, I hope your cereal will forever be soggy. Anyone who drops litter in nature, I have this unhinged urge to yell at them like a wild animal. So when you pick up bottles or recycle bottles, I think it's a good idea to empty them. Overall, like, it's not a bad idea. It's perhaps just a tiny bit too dramatic to say that the water will forever be trapped if we don't. Does that make sense? I think it's important to mention, however, that I don't mean to discourage anyone who is following the call to action from the Trap the Water movement. Any kind of climate action is good and valid, and often a small practical thing that we then start to realize is something we can do is a stepping stone into learning more about environmentalism, about sustainability, and about climate action. So that's good. And you might recognize this as well because you are on here watching this video, but the second you start to take a tiny bit interest in something with environmentalism, you will start to learn more and more, and you will fall down this rabbit hole of realizing all of this other stuff that you can also do. So maybe the Trap Water movement is the angle into environmentalism for a lot of people, and that I'm really excited about. The zero waste movement was my introduction into sustainability, and I have moved such a long way since I learned about zero waste and plastic pollution. Today I know that the majority of the issues cannot be summed up into a tiny product, but it's a brilliant place to start. And most people tend to start in one place, learn more, readjust, and then we just keep on learning forever. That's what we want. That is amazing. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments if you have heard of the Trap Water movement, if you are also doing it, or if you just learned something new as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you liked it. If you want more sustainability climate content, this is the place to be. Check out my impact series as well as my zero waste playlist. I hope to see you guys in my next video as well. Take really good care of yourselves. Until then, bye. Thank you so much for watching this video, and also a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys help me create green zero waste content, and I love you guys. You can find the links to my social media accounts down below and the link to my Patreon on this screen. Bye!